This is a short introduction to LDS Latter-day Saint history, and we'll give you the origins of the LDS Church. Almost everything I share here, just to be clear, is from LDS sources, so no LDS should find anything I say all that controversial. Yet there are some significant historical issues with some of this information, but since this is just an introduction, I won't get into it here, perhaps on a future video. But essentially, the beginning of the Mormon Church, the LDS Church, was during the Second Great Awakening. This was a large Protestant Christian movement within the United States where there are these huge revivals going on all over the country. And it was during this time in 1820 that Joseph Smith, as a young man of 14, had his first vision of God the Father and God the Son. And it's actually just past the 200th anniversary of this event. It was on March 26, 1820. So we just passed the 200th anniversary. And Joseph Smith apparently was conflicted because he didn't know which denomination to join. So he went into the woods and prayed over James 1:5, which tells us to ask God for wisdom. And he prayed and had this vision. And he was told by God the Father and God the Son that he was to join none of the denominations, that they were all wrong and their creeds were an abomination. Now, this was his first vision, and then he had a second vision a few years later when the angel Moroni appeared to him when he was in bed. And this happened numerous times, and the angel Moroni told him about these gold plates that contain an additional gospel of Jesus Christ and was given to the early inhabitants of the Americas, and that he would eventually give these gold plates to Joseph Smith. These would become the Book of Mormon. And Joseph Smith eventually received them, finding them buried on a hill near where he lived in New York. Now, a quick little piece of amusing recent history. This is the angel Moroni, who is on the top of the temple in downtown Salt Lake City. And just recently, on March 18th, 2020, there was a 5.7 earthquake in Utah, and it shook the angel Moroni's trumpet out of his hand. So at this very moment, which is just a few days after that, the angel Moroni doesn't have his trumpet. So as I said, these gold plates that Joseph received were accounts of the former inhabitants of the United States and the Americas, and they had apparently been visited by Jesus Christ. Now, along with these gold plates was something called the Urim and Thummim, which is an object we find in the Old Testament, but it's described here as being almost like supernatural glasses that Joseph Smith can use to translate these gold tablets. Oliver Crowley becomes Joseph's scribe, and as Joseph translates the Book of Mormon, Oliver writes it down. And then he's told through Revelation that he's not to show these gold plates to anybody except for the three witnesses, for three people. So at the beginning of the Book of Mormon, this is a picture of my Book of Mormon. You can see some of the notes I wrote down. We have the testimony of the three witnesses. Now, there is a historical issue with this, which this will be a quick side note, but all three men either left the Mormon church or confessed to not actually seeing the gold plates at one time or another. And it's interesting that it's told that there's only to be these three witnesses, yet in the Book of Mormon there's also the testimony of the 8 witnesses, and there's even some issues with some of these men's testimony. In 1829, John the Baptist appears and bestows upon Oliver and Joseph the priesthood of Aaron. And then later, the apostles Peter, James, and John all appear and bestow upon them the priesthood of Melchizedek. 1830, the Book of Mormon is published. April of 1830, the church is officially established. And between 1831 and 1844, Joseph Smith apparently receives over 135 direct revelations from God. Now, as the Mormon church grows and Joseph Smith gets followers, also conflict arises. As you can imagine, most of the population surrounding them were conservative, traditional, historical Christians. So these new teachings obviously come into conflict and there's problems. And the Mormon church continues to move west. Keep in mind, this is during the settling of the West, before the West was vastly populated. So they moved from New York to Ohio and then also Missouri. So for a while there's Mormons in Ohio and Missouri, but there continues to be conflict. Now, to be fair, some of this is unfair persecution. Some of this is unjust. People treat the Mormons um, unfairly, but at the same time, some of this is a response to Joseph's odd teachings and also Joseph's odd behavior and the behavior of some of the Mormons. So some of this is brought on by Joseph Smith's actions, and some of this apostasy is actually people becoming disillusioned with Joseph Smith and then becoming opponents of the Mormon Church. But eventually, Joseph Smith is arrested. He's allowed to escape, and essentially, Mormons settle down in Nauvoo, Illinois. But then on June 27, 1844, Joseph Smith is killed. He's arrested yet again, and again, this might be a controversial side note to LDS who might be listening, but there was a former Mormon who started a printing press and started printing anti-Mormon literature, and Joseph Smith actually told some of his followers to go and destroy this printing press, and this led to his arrest, as well as his brother's arrest and a third man, John Taylor, and a vigilante squad of 200 men decided to take the law into their own hands and go and kill Joseph Smith, which they did. This was interesting at the LDS Historical Museum, a powder horn of one of the men who was part of that mob of 200. And the person carved into this horn the end of the polygamist Joseph Smith. And this is a plaster cast of his face that was made after he was killed. With Joseph Smith's death, Brigham Young stepped in as leader of the Mormon Church. They continue to move west, and eventually in 1847 they come into this Salt Lake Valley and decide that's where they're going to settle. 1856 to 1860, we have over 3,000 Mormons who would take the train to Iowa City, which was as far west as you could take the train, and then they would use these hand carts. They decided to do this to save money and time, and they would take these hand carts for a journey of over 1,000 miles to Salt Lake Valley. Now again, some people see this as them being faithful and brave. Other people see this as foolish because it was a very arduous journey. But this is essentially what leads to what we know of Salt Lake City today.